It began with a sound that should not have been there. Not gunfire, not artillery, not tanks, just one sharp snap from somewhere inside the frozen trees. A German sentry stopped walking. The wind had been blowing across the dark forest all evening, but this sound was different. It was short, clean, deliberate. He turned toward the darkness and waited. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. Yet the strange feeling would not leave him.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
Someone was out there. Within the next 30 minutes, another guard disappeared. No shots. No scream. Only silence. By sunrise, an entire section of the German defensive line had fallen apart. Officers searched desperately for answers. Telephone wires had been cut. Machine gun positions had gone quiet. Patrols had vanished without leaving a single clear clue. Survivors spoke about shadows moving between the trees. They said the Americans did not attack like ordinary infantry. They appeared only when it was already too late. That night, many German soldiers learned why one American unit had earned a reputation that spread across Europe long before the war ended. They were the U.S. Rangers. Imagine standing in complete darkness, unable to see more than a few meters ahead. Every branch sounds like footsteps. Every gust of wind feels like someone breathing behind you. You know the enemy is nearby, but you never know exactly where. That fear became very real during one cold winter night in Europe. The story takes us to the European theater during the final months of 1944. After breaking out from Normandy during the summer, Allied forces had raced across France faster than many military planners expected. But by autumn, the advance slowed. German resistance became stronger. Supplies became harder to move. Thick forests, rivers, and rough hills favored defenders. Every village became another obstacle. Every road could become a deadly trap. Among the American units operating near the front were the Rangers. Their reputation had already been built through years of dangerous missions. They had climbed impossible cliffs during the landings in Normandy. They had fought through Sicily and Italy. They had survived battles where many believed no one could survive. Their training demanded speed, discipline, and aggressive action. Rangers were often assigned missions considered too dangerous for ordinary infantry. Their motto was simple: Rangers lead the way. It was not just a slogan. It described exactly what they were expected to do. Late in December 1944, fighting across Western Europe reached another critical stage. German forces had launched a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest. History remembers it as the Battle of the Bulge. The attack began on 16 December 1944. Thick fog, snow, and forests helped German troops achieve surprise. American units suddenly found themselves fighting defensive battles under terrible winter conditions. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Roads disappeared under snow. Medical evacuation became difficult. Fuel was limited. Even experienced soldiers struggled against exhaustion before facing the enemy. Night operations became even more dangerous. Visibility often dropped to almost nothing. Moonlight disappeared behind heavy clouds. Forests swallowed every sound. Soldiers could hear footsteps without knowing their direction. Friendly units sometimes became separated by only a few hundred meters, unable to find one another until daylight. German commanders believed these conditions worked in their favor, but they underestimated one important fact. Some American units trained specifically for exactly these situations. Inside a temporary command post built within a damaged farmhouse, American officers studied maps spread across a wooden table. Reports arriving throughout the evening described increased German activity near a wooded ridge overlooking an important supply route. Enemy patrols had become more aggressive. Several observation posts reported movement after sunset. Intelligence suggested German troops were preparing stronger defensive positions before another push toward Allied lines. Allowing those positions to remain would create serious problems. The decision came quickly. A Ranger patrol would move first, not to launch a large attack, not to capture a town. Their first objective was information. They needed to discover exactly what waited inside those woods. Leading the patrol was an experienced Ranger lieutenant who understood the value of patience. His men carried lighter equipment than ordinary infantry. Every unnecessary item stayed behind. Noise could mean death. Metal buckles were wrapped with cloth. Loose gear was tied down tightly. Faces were darkened. Weapons were checked one final time. Nobody spoke once they crossed the line. Every man already knew his assignment. Their watches had been synchronized. If separated, every movement had already been planned. Around 8:30 that evening, the patrol disappeared into the forest. The snow actually made movement more difficult. Every footprint could reveal their direction. Every frozen branch risked snapping beneath a boot. Progress became painfully slow. The Rangers moved one after another, leaving only enough space to react if the man ahead suddenly came under fire. Behind them, Allied artillery remained silent. Silence was part of the plan. Several hundred meters away, German troops believed the night would pass quietly. Most had spent the day strengthening defensive positions. Trenches had been reinforced with logs. Machine gun nests overlooked likely approaches. Mortar crews prepared firing data before darkness arrived. Officers expected another American daylight attack. Night raids were considered possible, but few expected anything significant in such terrible weather. Many soldiers tried to stay awake by drinking hot coffee whenever possible. Others stamped their boots against frozen ground to keep feeling in their feet. Fatigue affected everyone. The war had already lasted far longer than many expected. Some German replacements had received only limited training before arriving at the front. Experienced veterans stood beside frightened newcomers who had never fought inside a forest at night. Confidence varied greatly from one position to another. Then something changed. One listening post failed to report at its scheduled time. The delay seemed unimportant at first. Equipment failures happened. Telephone lines often froze or became damaged. A runner was sent to investigate. He never returned. The officer responsible for that sector became concerned. Another patrol was organized. This time, 4 soldiers entered the trees carrying flashlights they hoped they would never need. 10 minutes later, one flashlight briefly appeared between the trees. Then it vanished. No shots followed. No voices. Nothing. Back inside the forest, the Rangers had already discovered the first German observation point. Instead of opening fire, they surrounded it quietly. Speed mattered. Noise did not. The position was secured before nearby defenders realized anything had happened. The Rangers gathered valuable information from maps, field notes, and visual observation before continuing deeper into enemy territory. Their mission had suddenly become much more valuable. German positions were stronger than expected. Several machine gun nests covered the same open ground. Mortars were hidden behind a low ridge. Reserve troops waited farther back inside the woods. This was no simple outpost. It was part of a larger defensive network. The patrol leader understood immediately that Allied commanders needed this information before launching another attack. But leaving would not be easy. German soldiers had begun noticing small signs that something was wrong. One guard reported hearing footsteps where no patrol had been scheduled. Another claimed he briefly saw movement crossing a narrow trail. His report received little attention. The darkness often played tricks on tired minds. Still, officers quietly increased alert levels. Machine gun crews remained awake. Additional sentries took their positions. The forest became tense. Every man listened harder. Every shadow appeared suspicious. The Rangers sensed the change immediately. Enemy discipline had improved. Moving unnoticed became more difficult with every passing minute. The patrol slowed even further. Sometimes they remained completely still for several minutes while German soldiers passed only a few meters away. No one fired. Trigger discipline separated experienced special units from ordinary troops. The mission always came first. Near midnight, the Rangers reached a small clearing where several German field telephones connected different defensive positions. Thick cables disappeared beneath fresh snow before running toward command bunkers farther east. The patrol leader smiled quietly. Destroying those lines would create confusion across the entire sector. But timing mattered. If the cables were cut too early, German troops would immediately know someone had entered their rear area. Instead, the Rangers marked the location and continued observing. Patience again. That patience would soon change the entire battle. Farther behind the German front, officers studied reports arriving from neighboring sectors. Most described routine activity. Then another message arrived. Contact lost with forward listening post. Minutes later, another report. Patrol overdue. Still, no one fully understood what was happening. There had been no artillery, no infantry assault, no visible attack, only silence. Sometimes silence becomes the most dangerous weapon on a battlefield. Around 12:40 a.m., the Ranger Patrol completed its reconnaissance. They now possessed valuable intelligence about enemy defenses. Under normal circumstances, the mission would end there. But an unexpected opportunity appeared. A German supply convoy began moving along a narrow forest road. The vehicles carried ammunition and food toward the forward positions. If those supplies reached the front before dawn, the coming Allied assault would face much stronger resistance. The Ranger lieutenant faced a difficult decision: follow the original plan and return safely with intelligence, or stay longer and strike a target that could change tomorrow's battle. He looked toward the moving convoy. Then, back toward his men. Nobody needed to ask what they were thinking. They already knew the answer. The most dangerous part of the night had not even begun. The lieutenant understood exactly what was at stake. Every ranger in the patrol knew that the safest decision was to return immediately with the information they had collected. That alone would have made the mission a success. But war rarely rewards the safest option. The convoy moving through the forest represented more than trucks carrying supplies. It represented time. If those vehicles reached the front before daylight, German machine guns would have more ammunition, mortar crews would have more shells, and the defensive line would become much harder to break. The Rangers had only a few minutes to decide. The lieutenant studied the narrow road one last time. He quietly adjusted the plan, assigning each man a position along the frozen tree line. Every movement was made without unnecessary sound. No one rushed. Every ranger understood that surprise was worth more than numbers. The convoy continued forward through the darkness. The drivers believed they were still several kilometers behind the front line. Snow muffled the sound of the engines, while the thick forest blocked visibility beyond a few meters. The lead truck rounded a gentle bend, completely unaware that American Rangers were already watching from both sides of the road. The Germans had posted only light security because they believed their own defensive positions protected the route. That assumption would prove costly. The Rangers waited until the lead vehicle entered the narrowest section of the road. There was no shouting and no warning. A single burst of fire struck the front truck while another Ranger disabled the vehicle at the rear. Within seconds, the road was blocked from both directions. German soldiers jumped from the trucks in confusion, trying to identify where the attack had come from. The flashes from Ranger weapons appeared from different positions, creating the impression that a much larger American force surrounded the convoy. Before the Germans could organize a defense, the Rangers shifted positions again, firing from new angles before disappearing back into the darkness. The firefight lasted only a few minutes. Speed had always been one of the Rangers' greatest strengths. They had no intention of staying long enough for German reinforcements to arrive. Ammunition crates burned beside the damaged trucks, lighting the forest with an orange glow that could be seen far beyond the road. The Rangers collected useful documents from one of the vehicles before slipping back into the trees. Behind them, confused German survivors fired into empty woods, unable to find a clear target. The burning convoy immediately created another problem for the German command. Officers receiving reports over the telephone believed they were facing a much larger attack than reality. Messages from different units described Americans attacking from several directions. Some officers believed airborne troops had landed behind the lines. Others feared an entire battalion had broken through the forest. Without reliable communication, every report sounded worse than the last. This was exactly the moment the Rangers had been waiting for. Returning to the field telephone junction they had discovered earlier, the patrol quietly cut the communication lines linking several German positions. The effect was immediate. Forward units could no longer contact battalion headquarters. Requests for artillery support never reached their destination. Orders issued from the rear failed to reach machine gun crews guarding the approaches. Individual commanders suddenly found themselves making decisions with almost no information. Inside one German bunker, an officer repeatedly lifted the telephone receiver, hearing only silence. He sent runners toward neighboring positions, but moving through the dark forest had become dangerous. Nobody knew exactly where the Americans were. Every shadow could hide another Ranger patrol. Every snapped branch sounded like approaching footsteps. Fear spread faster than facts. Several German squads abandoned smaller observation posts and withdrew toward stronger defensive positions, believing they had already been surrounded. Those withdrawals created unexpected gaps in the defensive line. Other units, seeing neighboring positions suddenly empty, assumed a breakthrough had already occurred and began pulling back as well. What started as uncertainty slowly became disorder. Meanwhile, the Rangers continued moving deeper through the forest, carefully avoiding unnecessary battles. Their goal was not to destroy every German position. Their goal was to make the enemy uncertain about everything. They understood that confusion could achieve what heavy firepower sometimes could not. Every few hundred meters they paused, observed, and adjusted their route. Their discipline remained remarkable, despite exhaustion and freezing temperatures. By nearly 2:30 in the morning, German commanders finally realized something unusual was happening. Fresh patrols were ordered into the woods to locate the American force. These search parties advanced cautiously, expecting to encounter dozens of enemy soldiers. Instead, they found abandoned firing positions, fresh footprints disappearing into the snow, and occasional signs of brief firefights. The Rangers never remained in one place long enough to be trapped. One German patrol nearly caught them while crossing a shallow stream hidden beneath thin ice. A Ranger slipped, briefly breaking the silence. German soldiers immediately moved toward the sound. For several tense moments, both sides stood less than 20 meters apart. Nobody could clearly see through the darkness between the trees. The Rangers remained perfectly still, barely breathing. The Germans searched with flashlights only briefly before switching them off again, knowing the beams also revealed their own positions. After several long minutes, the patrol moved away, convinced the sound had come from falling ice rather than enemy soldiers. Only after the Germans disappeared did the Rangers continue moving. You can almost feel the freezing wind cutting through heavy winter uniforms as the patrol pressed forward. Fingers had become numb despite thick gloves. Boots were soaked from crossing frozen ground. Every man was tired. Yet no one complained. They knew the mission was far from over. Getting into enemy territory had been difficult. Getting out could be even harder. Just before 3 a.m., the Rangers reached a ridge overlooking the German defensive sector. From there, they could clearly observe vehicle movement, bunker locations, mortar positions, and reserve troops gathering behind the front. The lieutenant carefully recorded everything that Allied artillery commanders would need before the coming attack. This information alone could save hundreds of American lives once daylight fighting began. Back behind Allied lines, headquarters had begun wondering why the patrol had not yet returned. Radio silence remained part of the mission, preventing unnecessary transmissions that German operators could intercept. Officers could do nothing except wait. They understood that Ranger missions often required patience. Still, every passing minute increased concern. As the Rangers finally began their journey back, German activity intensified across the forest. Reinforcement companies entered the area, convinced that a large American force remained somewhere among the trees. Mortar crews fired illumination rounds into the night sky. White parachute flares drifted slowly above the battlefield, briefly turning darkness into daylight before fading again. Each burst of light forced the Rangers to freeze exactly where they stood. Even the smallest movement could reveal their position. Near the edge of the forest, the patrol encountered one final obstacle. A German machine gun team had established a temporary blocking position overlooking the most direct route back to American lines. The crew had no idea the Rangers were nearby. They were watching the opposite direction, expecting Americans to attack from deeper inside the woods. The lieutenant quietly changed course. Rather than launch a costly frontal fight, the Rangers circled through thicker trees until they reached the machine gun position from behind. The attack was fast, controlled, and over almost before nearby German troops understood what had happened. The position was secured, the weapon disabled, and the patrol continued moving before enemy reinforcements could react. By first light, exhausted Rangers crossed safely back into Allied territory. Their uniforms were soaked with snow and mud. Faces showed clear signs of fatigue after hours behind enemy lines. Yet every man returned carrying valuable intelligence that immediately changed Allied planning. Maps were updated. Artillery targets were corrected. Commanders now knew where German reserves were hidden and where their strongest defenses actually stood. Later that morning, Allied artillery opened fire using the information gathered during the night's mission. Shells landed with remarkable accuracy against command posts, mortar batteries, communication centers, and supply areas. German officers quickly realized the Americans possessed detailed knowledge of their defenses. Positions that had taken days to prepare were damaged within minutes. The confusion created during the night made organized recovery even more difficult. When American infantry advanced later that day, they encountered a defensive line already shaken by uncertainty. Some German positions fought stubbornly until overwhelmed. Others had already withdrawn after receiving conflicting reports during the night. Communication failures delayed counterattacks. Reserve units arrived too late or moved toward the wrong locations. The carefully organized defense never fully recovered from the disruption caused only hours earlier. Stories from surviving German soldiers spread quickly through nearby formations. They described an enemy that seemed to appear from nowhere, strike with precision, and disappear before anyone could react. Many believed they had faced far more Americans than were actually present. The Rangers had achieved something every military commander values. They had forced the enemy to doubt his own understanding of the battlefield. This reputation did not appear overnight. It had been earned through years of demanding training and repeated combat across North Africa, Sicily, Italy, Normandy, and Northwest Europe. Ranger volunteers accepted missions others considered nearly impossible. Their success depended not only on courage, but on preparation, discipline, teamwork, and careful planning. Every operation reinforced the lessons learned during previous battles. The fear they inspired was not based on myths or exaggerated stories. It came from experience. German units that encountered Rangers often discovered they were facing soldiers trained to move faster, think clearly under pressure, and exploit even the smallest weakness. They rarely relied on overwhelming numbers. Instead, they relied on surprise, initiative, and relentless determination. History remembers great battles because thousands of soldiers fought across huge fronts. But sometimes, the outcome of a larger battle begins with a handful of men moving silently through darkness. A single patrol can uncover information that changes an entire operation. One carefully planned night mission can force an enemy commander into costly mistakes before the main battle even begins. That cold winter night proved exactly that. The Rangers did not conquer an entire army by themselves. They did something equally important. They stole the enemy's confidence. They turned certainty into doubt, organization into confusion, and silence into one of the most powerful weapons on the battlefield. For many German soldiers who survived until dawn, the memory stayed with them long after the fighting ended. They had entered the night believing the forest belonged to them. By sunrise, they understood that somewhere beyond the trees were American Rangers who could appear without warning, strike with deadly precision, and vanish before anyone could stop them. That was why their reputation spread across Europe. That was why experienced German officers treated reports of Ranger activity seriously. And that was why, on one freezing night during the Second World War, German soldiers learned exactly why U.S. Rangers were feared.